Okay, so welcome to our first quarterly video update. We're here with Darryl Tempest, our Executive Director, and Marc Kealy, our GR representative.
Chief Advocate.
Chief Advocate.
Very well, thank you.
And this is part of a new initiative to increase transparency and really keep our members in the loop of what are we working on and kind of the newest updates as far as the legislative process goes. This is kind of new for me. As you know, we just had an election and we have a totally new board. And I was surprised to know that how much work is being done behind the scenes. And from the outside, you don't really see it because there's a lot of meetings going on, a lot of meetings with the government and internal meetings, and nobody really knows what's going on. So I really wanted to shed light on it. This is why we're doing it on video. And I just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I've been having discussions with members, and one of the things that I think that would benefit the most is learning a bit more about how the legislative process works.
Try and speak up and speak forward to the mic.
Yeah, so I just wanted to have Marc, if you could elaborate more about how the legislative process works as it pertains to Bill S5.
As it pertains to this particular piece of legislation, the whole history around S5 came about as a result of the previous, not this current government, the previous government. And how it really came about is the minister of the day, Rona Ambrose, had said, there's something about vaping that I need to learn more about. So there's a committee that's been established. It's a standing committee, which means it's in perpetuity, always struck to do this particular work. So she wrote a letter to this committee, said, do some work for me, find out about this. So the committee met and they came up with some recommendations. The recommendations said vaping is seemingly a pretty ubiquitous activity right now. It's starting to take hold in Canada. We might have to regulate it. So that prompted the government of Canada to say we're going to go down a path to introduce some kind of regulation. I want to take a couple of seconds though, Boris, and just tell you that at the same time that happened, as people may or may not know, the provinces have an obligation under their constitutions as governments to protect the health of their citizens in their provinces. So at the same time that the feds were contemplating legislation for vaping, almost every province with the exception of Alberta and Saskatchewan have gone down the path of legislation and regulations. So the Canadian Vaping Association was struck at the latter part of 2014. Since that time, every province, as I said, with the exception of those two provinces, had gone down the path of legislation and regulations. Ontario right now is at the point where they're looking at amending regulations that we had suggested they ought to amend, the CVA. And at the same time that happened, the Fed said we're going to go down the path of amending the Tobacco Act, where we're going to put vaping in its own category under that particular act. And so that prompted Bill S5. The reason it's called S5 is the S stands for Senate, which means that it's really a Senate royal assent piece of legislation. So it doesn't necessarily change the act, it just adds to it. And that's where we're at right now. It's gone back from all of the Senate hearings that we had participated in as the Canadian Vaping Association. It's gone back to the House of Commons, and it's being contemplated for amendment and further royal assent.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned that it's its own category under, even though it's in this, some people think that it is being regulated as tobacco or being put in the same category as tobacco.
No, and let me be crystal clear. The reason why they put it under the Tobacco Act is no matter how you slice it or dice it, vaping is son of smoking. It's an alternative. We've even said that it's an alternative to smoking. So as a consequence of that, it was a lot more expedient for the government of Canada to put it under the Tobacco Act. And frankly, if you read the Tobacco Act, it's written as if it's criminal law. It's prohibition. So you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. So everybody thinks, well, it's highly prejudicial. No, we've got our own category, but they do put some prohibition in there. We just work with them to make sure that the regulations reflect the fact that this is a less harmful alternative to smoking cigarettes, and that's really in the body of the act right now. So I think those kinds of things are I'm going to call them victories on behalf of the work that the Canadian Vaping Association had done on behalf of its members.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's an important point that Marc brings up, because If you look at the legislation, proposed legislation regulations, we live within a framework, a national framework in Canada. Right, we are part of the citizenship of this country, so that there is a responsibility on us as a stakeholder to help be part of that framework, as opposed to just saying, you know what, this is what works for us and this is what we want. Is and when you describe it as work behind the scenes, I actually kind of steer away from that particular term, because it's work as part of the process. Legislative work is an ongoing process that's happened for hundreds of years. It's not this happens on Tuesday and then Thursday you're done, right? It is really a long, long process. And one of the ways to best be respected and trusted by government is that they understand that you have the longevity to stay and to be part of the engaged citizenship of this country. I think that's one of the things that government truly respects.
Well, I think they respect the fact, too, that we said right from the outset that we're going to work with them.
Yeah.
I think, we've been talking about this for a long time, Boris, about how important it is to, when you deal with government, that you're trusted, number one, and you're effective, number two. And I think the way you become effective is that you work with them. We subscribe to the notion in our business that people govern people. If you act like a jerk, you're going to be treated like a jerk. If you act well, you're going to be treated well. And I think we've been acting very, very well as an association. And I like to think, as a consequence of that, governments, not only at the national level, but at the provincial level, are giving us the credit that we're owed for the way we've been acting.
We've earned.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we've earned.
And I guess that's part of why we're not fighting against S5, but rather working with the government to make it work.
Well,
for vapers.
And I've heard this a lot, not only from CVA members, but from people who are vape advocates, that we should oppose Bill S5. My question back would be, what would you oppose? If you oppose S5, what's the option? The option is there's no legislation so they would ban vaping for all intents and purposes. So even parliamentarians at the national and the provincial level are kind of scratching their heads saying, some people are opposing this, you guys. And we said, no, we're not opposing it. CVA has not opposed Bill S5, nor will we, because the opposite of opposing it would be banning vaping. So that's how politicians are thinking. If you're opposing Bill S5, that means you're supporting the banning of vaping. So that's a conundrum that I think we have to deal with. If they don't like the elements of Bill S5, that's a different story. And I think we've done a terrific job. I'm going to say behind the scenes, because I liked your point at the outset, being a lot more transparent, to say, here's what we fought against. We fought against what was going on in the province of Quebec, and I think we're winning as a consequence of that. We fought against the amendments in the province of Ontario, and the amendments have not been passed because of us being in opposition to the amendments that they put forward. We had a very large struggle with Ottawa on Bill S5 on some of those points, and I think we've done a terrific job of saying to them, well, we'll bring around some kind of a discussion that puts us in a position where we could actually be of assistance to the government of Canada as they're contemplating regulation, or even things like the words that we could use. Originally, everything was a prohibition, and that's not really the case under Bill S5 anymore. I like to think that we had a large part in making those kinds of changes that form the basis of the act that's going to be given royal assent months from now.
Could you actually talk about the royal assent? Because I think there's a lot of confusion about that term. What does that mean, and how does it dictate the timeline of the implementation?
So as Darryl said, this has been going on for hundreds of years, right? So this is parliamentary democracy at its finest. So what happens is a piece of legislation gets introduced. And when it's introduced, that's called first reading. Then it has second reading after some initial debate. And when it gets after second reading, they always turn it over to what they call a period of committee. So a committee that's struck of the House of Commons in this particular case to study it. And they bring in witnesses who are expert on either side of the issue. And what ends up happening is they have a protracted period, and oftentimes it could be up to 75 days. But they say you're going to have this protracted period to study this and then render a decision that goes back to the House of Commons for debate after second reading. The debate happens, and then they got what they call third reading, which means that the issue is closed, and then it's contemplated for what they call royal assent. That period then goes to what they call the governor and council. And the governor and council signs it, and it becomes an act. And so that could take anywhere from, it could be a very short period of time to years and years and years. But in this particular case, this legislation was introduced in 2016. Here we are coming up to 2018. So it's not inconceivable that it would be, a year and a half that this would really become a law, an act. Mm-hmm. But here's the interesting part about an act. Every act is written, how do I say this? It's written very generally, so the words that they use are not so specific. And then they put the specifics into what they call the regulations. And so when it gets royal assent, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be this is how it's going to work moving forward until the regulations are passed. And so that could take another 6, 7, 8 months to do that.
To implement the regulations.
Correct. Yeah. Because there's a whole public process on the regulations as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think in terms of if you look at when you look at the bill, many of the lawmakers, which would be parliamentarians, that would oppose S5 would say it was because it's too permissive, not because it's too restrictive.
That's a great point.
And it's really a lot of the efforts from the CVA have been working towards building relationships with those who say we know that the regulations have to make sense, but they don't have to make sense for vaping businesses, vaping manufacturers. That's not the business that they're in. They're in the business of making sure that the laws and that the regulations, as part of those laws, make sense for Canadians as a general group. Right?
And so from just to paraphrase or echo that, what Darryl's really saying is that as a stakeholder, as a big stakeholder in this industry, Canadian Vaping Association, we have to see it through our lens for sure. We have to make sure that things that we want to see in that piece of legislation are in that piece of legislation. Or if there are changes we want to see, we have to see it through that lens as well. But we have to do that knowing full well that that's who's sitting on the other side. We're one player in a sea of all these people who don't like cigarette smoking and who view us as a son of cigarette smoking. Because we inhale something and exhale it, they view it as smoking. So there are people that really don't understand this and what it's done. So we have to do it at almost like a triple time on having to say to people why it's better to vape than it is to smoke cigarettes. And so those kinds of issues we've done to educate parliamentarians. Let me give you this as a great example. The Minister of Health in Newfoundland stood up in the assembly in Newfoundland and said nicotine causes cancer. Those are the kinds of, that's misinformation. He deliberately made a statement that was misinformed and actually caused a whole bunch of problems for us. So we had to pretty much challenge him at the end of the day, saying, Minister, you can't make those kinds of statements. And they were pretty fast in turning that around, saying that we had helped them in sort of understanding where this is coming from. But you could imagine that because it's such a new industry, we're fighting all of that misinformation that's out there at a time when we need everybody who's a member of the Canadian Vaping Association to say, let's come together and speak with one voice, not with opinion, but with real evidence that gives lawmakers, the parliamentarians that Darryl's talking about, the confidence that we're a good advocate for this industry.
Yeah, and I think there's always three important messages that I always try to give membership. Is that one, it took cannabis 100 years to do what the Vaping Association has done in 5. It's a phenomenal feat of which the collectivity of the membership should be very proud of.
Yeah,
I think the second thing is I hear we vape and we vote. I think that's important. So do members of Heart and Stroke. So do members of the Lung Association. Engage stakeholder groups of which we need to participate with. We can't villainize people. They're engaged and they vote as well. So understanding how we weave into that and become part of the solution as part of our collectivity as a stakeholder group and as a membership, that's where we're going to find that we're going to build more relationships as we go through years and years and years. And it was because of the work of K&A and certainly, and I give a ton of credence to the board's previous, from their leadership, right from the first board on. Yeah.
But But I'm just going to say this, Boris, why I enjoy working with you is because you've seen, even from this perspective, you've said, why don't we engage with the Lung Association or Heart and Stroke or these guys and debate with them. But I think even debate's a tough word for them because they would want to debate with us. I think that there are ways we could work together. If we go down the path and make the comments that we are an alternative to smoking and less harmful. Yeah. So those arguments have already been made in the UK, for example, and they've got great traction. So the National Health System in the UK is not necessarily saying that vaping is harmless, but they are saying it's less harmful than smoking cigarettes. And they've even put a percentage to that. So those are the kinds of things that I think we need to be doing here to engage. That's why I like your idea about engaging with Lung Association, Heart and Stroke, asthma, all of those others, not as adversaries, but as groups that we could work with to help them understand where we're coming from.
Because theoretically, we should be aligned. I mean, we have the same objective of reducing smoking.
Yes, and it's the number one avoidable form of death.
Look, we've been talking at great lengths to organizations like the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, and they've actually been saying to us, well, we should be advocating for you as a normalized behavior. And we have some significant support from senior people at CAMH, where I think that should be, to our members, they should be saying, wow, I never even realized that. So it speaks to your point about more transparency, more communication.
Wanted to ask about what's next as far as accreditation and certification programs.
Do you want?
You go ahead.
So that's a great question. I'll tell you, we have now garnered, because we've suggested to Health Canada that we'll go down a path to work collaboratively with any organization that wants to work with us on the establishment of certification for those people who are detailing the public on
You're
vaping.
saying like a vape shop employee?
Correct.
Yeah. So it would be something similar to like a Smart Serve certificate for alcohol, but it would apply to vaping.
Correct.
Yes.
I'd even go one step further, because they're looking at us so prescriptively at Health Canada and saying, if you're going to detail somebody on this, I want to make sure that if you're detailing them, that you're certified or qualified to be giving that kind of information in public. So we've worked with a career college to work with us to develop a curriculum, and under their license, we would certify those people in every province across Canada. This is not whimsy. This is not, you could just check it off like a boat smart. You have to actually go down the path of demonstrating that this is something that you're good at and you've passed with flying colors to get. This certificate is valuable. And frankly, it puts this industry in a really hallowed position, because at the end of the day, you'd want to have this as a career path if you're going down the path of wanting to help somebody get off smoking such that they would vape. And if you're certified to give them that right kind of information, so much the better for you. And the industry follows suit by paying you appropriately. That's part one of it.
Certification.
The certification. Mm-hmm. Part two is the accreditation. We have been working very closely with Health Canada and the Government of Canada on the Standards Council of Canada. We, CVA, were largely responsible for two appointees on that board. They asked us a long time ago, who should we put on it? Somebody who knows a lot about the hardware, how this stuff works, et cetera, et cetera. They've been on it for quite a while. And now our president, Sean Casey, has been appointed to the Standards Council of Canada, because he's an expert. He's not only as a chemist, he knows what's going on inside these things, but he's an expert on the whole issue on vaping. And that, for the Standards Council, says, what could we do then for your industry to put you in a position where there's quality, or so we're guaranteed that whomever is in this business is qualified to do that. And the way you do that is you accredit the manufacturing facility so that they have all these standards and protocols and procedures in place, and we qualify vape product shops so that they've got all this, the policies, procedures, and how we want to call it, but the quality that's in there, so that that people would say, okay, I'm going to do it. The contrary to that is, if you don't, the world is going to know that you're not qualified or you're not accredited to be doing this, then you better not go to that shop. So I think it puts us in a very, very hallowed position. I'm excited about it, particularly, Boris, because we've been having discussions with other jurisdictions. And they're saying to us, we like what you're doing in Canada, and we want to participate with you guys moving forward in our country as well. I think that's a huge message that we should be celebrating, that the CVA has put in place a standard for accreditation and a standard for certification that the world would say, I want. And you'll see that in the next couple of years, it's almost going to be a domino where Canada's going to lead the entire world on certification for this.
Mm-hmm. And I think there's a ton of value in it for members. Best practice exchange for their businesses, understanding how to ensure that consumers are protected. The last piece is I think there's an onus on us. I always try to do that, and a lot of people who don't spend a lot of time with government tend to mix party politics with what government is. It's not a liberal government. It is government. And I will take a page from a dear friend who always says it's capital G government. Our government, and I'm very proud of it, took the leadership position globally at COP7 when they were offered a deal to ban vaping completely in this nation. Would have been easy, sign off. And our government said, no, it's not in the best interest of Canadians not to have this platform available. What certification and accreditation does is it says to government that we understand our role as a responsible stakeholder to provide the best protections available for Canadians. So they took a leadership role to say, we can make a solution in this country by entrepreneurs and stakeholders in the industry. We have faith in you. That's why they didn't sign on to COP7. We're repaying that faith and building that legacy and that partnership with government by taking these types of steps.
Precisely.
Yeah. So a consequence of signing on to that would be kind of like Australia. It would be like Australia or like
New Zealand.
New Zealand, yeah. Sweden,
yeah.
right?
Or total prohibition.
Yeah. India.
Yeah, 1 billion people, right, with high smoking rates. And I think if you look at the brave steps that they've taken in the United Kingdom, is one of the things is, and I travel there as much as I do, everybody smokes. Like it's crazy, right? And you walk down the streets or you're outside the pubs, everybody's smoking. And decision makers and stakeholders there said, we need to do something for our citizenship, and we are well down that path with our government as well.
I just wanted to touch base quickly on Manitoba and kind of the process that went on there.
Yeah, great start. Be good.
Well, I could speak to it because Beju Lakhani, the former president of the CVA, he and I were the ones who negotiated on behalf of the industry with respect to the government. So the government said, here's what we're doing. We're going to go down this path. As you know, it changed from NDP to Conservatives, and the Conservatives had said, we're not going to change anything. We're going to go down this path. We want to know from you what you'd want to see. And so one of the things that we were advised by the government is, they said, I think we're going to allow vaping or vape products to be purveyed at convenience stores. But we took great exception to that because we thought this would entirely ruin everything we're working on with respect to accreditation, certification, and the industry as a whole. So we were smart, I think, by suggesting here's all the vape product shops in Manitoba. We identified them, we worked with them, and with Manitoba Health, we had suggested why don't we qualify or register a vape product shop in the regulations. Mm-hmm. So they said we're going to allow vaping products to be purveyed or sold at a vape product shop as long as it's qualified. So we brought that to the table, and we, for all intents and purposes, won the order of the day by saying to convenience store owners, if you want to sell vape products, you have to be a qualified vape product shop. Mm-hmm. And so that meant a change in their existing business model. We already had the business model. So we were the business model that they put right into the regulations. I think that's a huge win.
That doesn't mean like that vapers are not going to have access to each refills through through convenience stores, though, right? I mean, it just means that the initial educational phase that is very critical is going to happen inside of a vape shop, a qualified vape shop.
Correct. And so you'll see exactly what you're saying. You'll see it even get more remarkable once the S5 comes in, because it'll be the acetate overlay on top of what the provinces are doing. But what they've said was, here's the place right now where we trust vape products could be sold appropriately. And that's a vape product shop.
And it started off as a complete ban on indoor vaping and sampling and things like that, right?
Oh, it was draconian.
Yes.
And again, Darryl is right. It doesn't matter whether it's an NDP government or a conservative government. They're a government, and they'd said this is what we want. And but they really took our advice, I thought, and said, we understand that you guys are the right quality for this, so therefore we're going to give it to you, and they put it right into the regulation. Mm-hmm. The other thing they did, which I thought was a big win too, was they review these pieces of legislation over a period of time. And one of the things that we did, and I think from a national perspective, we won the day in terms of the government of Canada saying, we'll review this every once in a while. It'll be every 2 years. But that's what they did in Manitoba. They took our advice and said, every 2 years we'll review this.
Yeah.
I think that's a remarkable win for this industry, and it says a lot about how effective I think we were as an association on behalf of our membership to do that.
Well, and we use examples. One of the strongest examples that I come up with is Jack, another former president of this association. Jack is widely considered one of the grandfathers of the industry.
Sure.
So I asked Jack, I was like, how long have you been in the business? Jack is one of the grandfathers of the industry. He said, 8 years. 8 years. Right? Confederation and lawmaking's been around for 350. Right? It's quite remarkable how this industry has matured as comparative to many, many, many others.
Sure.
And the thing we have to keep in mind is, for those who don't vape, or those who don't smoke, or those who make laws, or those who review laws, is that we're still in the industry of something going into the body. So as long as something is going into the body, it should be regulated. Right? And that these are the paths to regulations that I think are starting to really work, such as this example.
And as a corollary to that, if you put something in your body and then you exhale it, well, then the government's going to say, I'm even going to be stricter on it.
Yeah, because you're
affecting others.
You're affecting others.
So we touched on regulations a little bit, and I know we're formulating a response together with some stakeholders. I understand there's a Kaizen, a meeting with stakeholders from all over the country to formulate our official response regarding those 10 proposals. Yeah. Do you guys have any concerns in what's in those regulations?
Well, there are no regulations yet. So Health Canada put out what we'll call a licitation, and its licitation said, we're musing about this. So we've got some recommendations that we want you to consider. And they're just thoughts, random thoughts that they'd had. But don't forget, it goes back to what Darryl had said. You have enormous amounts of organizations who who think that vaping is very much similar to smoking, who are offering their advice and opinion. And I'm going to say that they're offering their opinion about this. And as long as it's not backed up by evidence, it's going to be countenanced as opinion. So we need to be very crystal clear in the regulations that everything that we put forward as opinion is considered and has evidence to back it up. And we're doing that. We're talking with the UK, we're talking with the United States, we're talking right now with even folks who are in Europe, noted professionals who have research under their belts with this kind of an industry, who are advising us as well. That's pretty heady. So we're going to go into that with that kind of evidence to back up our considered opinion when we're talking about regulations.
Yeah, and then we're also seeking the opinions of many of those experts within our own membership. We have a lot of talent there. And to get to the Kaizen event, and with what Krim is doing, is making sure that we're tapping the best ideas as a membership through our collectivity to give the best advice that we can to government. Government is the decision maker. They're elected to make those decisions, right? I've seen hundreds and hundreds of bills go through over the years. This is one of the best examples, and I give government a lot of credence for this, is they are reaching out. They are giving lots of opportunity. Our government relations team and our board member and our chief advocate are in constant communication on a bi-weekly and monthly basis with those at Health Canada and those decision makers and parliamentarians. I've been at some of those meetings, and they're all ears. I've never sat down where they said, "Oh no, you're smoking. Get out of my office." It's tell me more, right? And especially when it comes to these Kaizen events, is really building our narrative, and it strengthens our not only our result but our opportunity to bring in those best ideas. So we have a Kaizen event coming up when it comes to responses to the regulations, and when it comes to accreditation and certification. This isn't 5 people in a room just deciding, what needs to happen. This is taking those who are industry experts, such as the grandfathers like Jack, and putting them into the room and saying, how did you do so well for so many years? And what are you doing that's in the best interest of Canadians? And then being able to present that to government.
From what I understand, it's going to be 15 to 20 people from all over the country, various industries, manufacturing, retail, distribution, hardware.
Coast to coast, and very differing opinions and views. We seek very hard to stay away from things like groupthink, right? We needed to do a better job, I think, as an organization to be a little bit more inclusive, right? To me, it's not about. I find the CVA, and I've been parts, and I lead several organizations. It's one of the most transparent organizations I've ever been part of. It's actually quite incredible. I think what we're improving on, and we're maturing, just like the industry is as a membership, is inclusiveness, and that's really what those Kaizens and those events are: is giving people an opportunity to be part of the process.
I'd love to also videotape it just so that our members can see how the process works.
Very much so, yeah. And it's one thing and I've gotten comments from new board members in the last board, and then comments from new board members such as yourself. Is once they became board members, they're like, I didn't think it was. This is what it was, and really substantive conversations. And I think we're invigorated by the new board as well, because it's brought in so much new thought process for us, and we can take all the amazing learnings we got from the past board and then marry it, and the same thing will happen on the next board and the next board, and we continue to build a library of really great thoughts and ideas, and to grow those thoughts and ideas as we grow as an organization.
You made a good point. This is a very transparent organization. I think what's been done has been done in the open. There's been no secret deals, but you can't negotiate everything in front of everybody. Yeah. There are things that you have to do with government that there's fighting that needs to occur, and there's give and take a lot of times. But I think, and maybe this is something you need to take credit for, Boris, is to really to increase the level of communication that's happening, because that's really been the biggest challenge with the CVAs. How do you communicate with everybody across the country? And I think these are remarkable venues to do that.
I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions. People don't know that their board is volunteers from the industry, sacrificing their time away from their work, and we're scattered across the entire country, and that that's actually a remarkable amount of good work that's being done. That's not being recognized and not being seen. So I'm very happy that you guys took the time and let me.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime. Okay.